Hello everyone, I've just read chapter 27 of Coruscant Nights, Jedi Twilight. So we pick back up with Nick, who's still in the Far Ranger, and I have to remind myself, was it Nick who was already landed? But no, it was Caird. You can tell I've been slightly struggling with this book, and just slightly struggling to follow it, and I think it's just because of the amount of plot lines there are. I mean, in the book I've written there's quite a few plot lines, but there's definitely not as many as there are here, there's about 4 or 5, maybe 6 characters with and different plot lines with following. There's about 4 main plot lines, and they each can relate to 6 main, not 6, so 8 different characters, so it's a bit hard to keep track of them all. But anyway, Nick's in the Far Ranger, and he decides that while he's in there, he'll have a look around. And he examines the modifications that Coven and Mocker made to it, and it was actually quite good. Made some good modifications. He finds some very typical smuggler stuff and things. And then he finds an item that looks a bit, which is a power handle, and it looks quite like a lightsaber in the weapons, and it's in the weapons cache. And Nick is tempted to try and light it and see what it would, extinguish through the little port through the exhaust, but he knows not to use weapons while he's in flight. Anyway, when he lands, he's given a skimmer, and he rents a skimmer, and he starts making his way down, and he just starts thinking about his people and having to find Jax. Which there's some key stuff that I want to bring up, but I have to go back in the chapter to find it. Okay, he had really just considered taking the Far Ranger and flying back up into space and trying to find a new home for himself, but he hadn't. And we're told that Rahinian, and I think it's meant to be Rahinen, or because I go Rahinian, but there's only one I, so it's Rhinanann. So it's probably meant to be Rahinen, but I keep saying Rahinian. Anyway, he told Nick that there was there's a tracker placed under Nick's skin that's so small that you wouldn't even be able to see it with the naked eye or feel it. And we're told that Nick was quite literally have to skin himself to actually find it. And according to Rahinian, it would be able to track him halfway across the galaxy, and Nick doubted the claim, but not enough to actually act on his impulse to try and escape. I kind of doubt that there is a tracker in him. Right, a tracker that's so small to the naked eye, it feels like they're just trying to intimidate Nick into doing something without actually putting anything in him. But yeah, then again, it would be reasonable to put something in him in case something like that happened. But then again, it's also a little bit later in the chapter brought up that they made sure that Nick didn't have a choice in capturing Jax. By making a choice, it's just so unfair. And we saw that he doesn't know a lot about Vader, but he knows that he's definitely made some preparations in case Nick did one. And how bad those consequences could be for both Nick and his people. And then Nick thinks, is he really? And that's a very... and that it doesn't seem to have any kind of context, that thought. It just kind of comes out of nowhere. It just doesn't kind of make sense in the context. And is he is he finding out that, oh, is he maybe Anakin or not? But I don't think he is. You know, like, because we're told, it says, after all, if the Dark Lord was willing to destroy an entire clan for one man, and then he goes, is he really? And we're told that Vader does know where the droid, where Bug Eyes is. And we're told that he knew the droid was high priority, maybe not, and if not top priority, high priority. And then we're told that then Vader must really want Nick bad, not Nick, Jax bad, if he knows where the droid is, and he's instead using the droid to basically lure Jax out into a trap. And Nick can only imagine how bad it must be for when Jax is captured by Vader, and what horrors he'll be put through. We're also told that Nick records out any claim from an Imperial officer about them actually exterminating his clan, but Vader is called Vader, and he also thinks that if the order didn't come from Vader or Palpatine, he wouldn't have really taken the claim very seriously as he has. Anyway. And then we're told that Nick is just saying to himself, oh, who's he kidding? Vader made the choice so unfair that he would have had to have said yes to find Jax. And he goes down to the streets, the M sector. And that's where we end off with Nick. Is there any other bits I want to talk about? Okay, yeah, I pretty much talked about everything with Nick. Anyway, then we pick up with Dender, Jackson, I5, and Lavant, who are, and Jax ignites his lightsaber, Lavant draws their blasters, and Lavant asks how they found us, and Jax says, well, does it matter? It's probably Rocco. An I5 corrects Jax, saying that the rover can still use the Force. It doesn't say with the Bully Boys, but we know it's with the Bully Boys. And he says that they identified him as a Jedi. Sorry, I have to keep checking this chapter. Oh yeah, Den wriggles three of I5. So it's no longer in the cradle's baby position, because he thinks that, well, if it's going to come to, even though he can't fight, he has no super reflexes or senses or martial art training or drive a steel hull, but he thinks if it does come to a fight, he's not going to impair I5's weapons by him being carried by him. And he asks if this is a good idea, because they can just hover above them and shoot whenever they like. And Lemon says that if they can hit her, she can hit him. And I5 says that no, they use T-21 blaster cannons, and that they have greater range than Navant's pistols. And eventually, Jack, I think it's Jax. Yeah, it is Jax, and he says, anyone got any better ideas? Oh, I5 says that they outrange Mammoth by 100 meters. Anyway, Jax says, has anyone got any better ideas? And Den suggests running. Um, And I5 spots the warehouse and he makes his way in, and he sees there's some weavers in there, and he calls for the rest for Den, um, Larenth and Jax to come in, and he of course shows them the weavers, but they can only hold 2 people. So Jax says for Larenth to take Den, and Jax will take I5. And we get some various thoughts, musings from Den in here as well. About the current situation. Then what? Sorry. Then he takes command of the Weaver while Larenth will shoot the weapons. And just as they're about to leave the warehouse, the 2 PCBUs block the way. And they say to what did I say? To surrender in the name of Emperor Palpatine. And Jax says to I5 that they need a new way out, so I5 cuts into the back wall of the warehouse with his laser fingers, but I assume with his laser fingers. I don't think it clarifies, but I think that's what it is. He cuts through it, and the 2 and Jax and I5 make their way out, and Den follows, and that's where we end the chapter. Generally, not too much to talk about this chapter. I'm probably going to I'll probably spend more time summarising the chapter than I probably will talking about this chapter, and now I'll probably jinx it anyway. First off, it's really interesting that Vader knows where the droid is, and he's risking compromising its starter just to lure Jax out. You know, that's very interesting. And again, we talked a little bit more about, you know, how Nick feels like he's in a really unfair situation, and you understand why. With Jackson haven't, you know, it's good to see that even though they definitely haven't warmed up to Den and I5 yet, you know, they're at least trusting them to help them in this situation that they're in. And you know, I5 continues to be a very creative in the way he in how he works thing and how he works to get out of these situations. But yeah, again, there's just not a whole lot to really talk about with this chapter. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else I really want to talk about with this chapter. There's just not really a whole lot to talk about. The T-21s did intrigue me. You know, that was a nice surprise. I wasn't for some reason I wasn't expecting the T-21 blast lights repeating cannons to be brought up, but you know they were. That surprised me. Um, so yeah. Um, what does the next chapter entail? Okay, we'll be picking up right where we left off next chapter. Okay. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say on this chapter. Aside from, you know, Den is just great in this chapter, but then again, he always is. I always say he's great. You know, five are great. So yeah, really, there's just not a whole lot to talk about with this chapter. I mean, we have a lot of new. We really do see into Nick's thoughts and again his perspective of everything. But again, there's not really a whole lot to talk about with that. I don't think. Because we've already we've already kind of covered all of that in previous reviews. So I don't really think I have much to really say with the Nick part of this chapter. So yeah, I think let's just have something to talk about. I think the things I'm going to be really looking forward to go in coming up that will be coming up. Um, First off, it's just Jack's 11th day in an I5. Like, it's gonna be really interesting to see the four of them to working together and maybe Jack's even warming up to I5. That'll be interesting to see. Um, I'm very intrigued to see what will happen with Rahinian. Because it's kind of been left a bit ambiguous so far as to what's going to happen to him. Because he's been summoned by Vader and it's not made clear as to why. So that's going to be interesting. I have a feeling he's going to get killed. Because I know he does die at some point, but I don't know when, in what book he dies. Or so, yeah. I don't even know if it's an original creation for this book series or if he's been in other book series. It wouldn't surprise me if he has been in other book series. Um, just because there's so many characters in this book that have been in other books. Den and I-5 are from another book. Jack's been brought up in various books before he was fully appeared here. I think maybe I don't know if Rocco was in another book, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was. But I'm fairly sure Cares has been in other books as well. But yeah, there's been various characters. Dalper, he's been in other books. But yeah, there's various characters in this that I've been in other books and stories, like Nick as well. So yeah. Um, Also, really want Cairds to be able to go home. He's another character that I'm really intrigued. That I just really rooted for his storyline. It's very not really connected to everything that's going on, but still, I really want Cairds to be able to go home. But yeah, anyway, that kind of brings an end to this review. Not really. I kind of just thought, I think I've got more out of saying what I'm looking forward to rather than actually talking about this chapter. But there's just generally not a whole lot about this chapter to talk about. Um, I actually kind of debated whether actually to make a review for this while reading the chapter because it was just okay. Well, but firstly, I don't really want to talk about. I just didn't kind of want to make a review. Also, it was for this chapter, but also it's just it's just not really a whole lot to talk about for this chapter. So yeah. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, just for chapter, I think it's 28. Yep, 28 of Coruscant Nights, Jedi Twilight. And I think this chapter really does solidify 11th as one of the coolest Jedi. But we'll get to her because we pick up with Jax and I-5 who are being pursued by two PCBU units, which are described as basically ships driven by 501-Z police droids. And the way the PCBUs are described, because I thought they were initially just droids, but no, they're actual ships. Well, small ships that are driven by the droids. They're basically just UFOs. That's basically what they are. That's literally just what they are. They're UFOs, basically. That's all you really need to know. But they're chasing Jax and I-5 and they're driving down the streets, the industrial streets, which are empty. So they can go out at full speed with something like 60 kilometers an hour. But anyway, they're driving down the streets and the streets are all really cluttered. There's columns, there's supports for the buildings, etc. And so they have to keep weaving and dodging everything. And we're told that hasn't had much sleep in the past 3 days, so even though a Jedi can use the Force to enhance their stamina to greater capacities than than most living beings, he's just not at his peak. Anyway, I5 remarks that I thought you said Vader wanted you alive because there's lethal shots being fired at them. And Jax says, I said probably. He probably wants me alive. And I5 comments that it looks to be more like dead or alive at the moment. Anyway, they keep going down and the streets just keep getting smaller and smaller. I5 suggests that maybe he should take over. Because and Jax says, well, if you think you can do better, maybe we should... Then they'll change places, otherwise he can shut up. But, an I5 being I5 is this very witty remark, saying that, well, unless his strategy includes trying to get us killed, then I suggest you let me take over. Maybe that came a little bit earlier, actually. Jax has to really fight the urge just to push I5 off. And I5 asks if he has any strategy. And Jax replies, other than giving them you. And I5 says that he does, then he assumes he just doesn't. And then that's when we're told about Jax not being at his peak. And I5 explain, and then Jax says, okay, what's your plan? And I5 explains that because of how narrow the streets are, they can't always build physical structures for the support. So sometimes energy fields, etc., are used to support them. What was it specifically? Gigantic structural stabilization braces, tiebacks, and commoner supports are the physical stuff, and then the tractor and pressure fields are used as like the energy ones when the streets aren't big enough, and they're in pretty much an alleyway now, and so the PCBUs are about to go single file, and Jax eventually just decides to take up I5's advice. And when one of the PCBUs goes in there, it starts to wobble out of control and crashes. And Jax tries to continue to go on, but he finds himself at a dead end, and the second PCBU doesn't fall for the field, and it slows down and just disappears. And anyway, when Jax and I5 turn the Weaver around to try and go back the way they came, they see the second PCBU float down in front of them. Then we pick up with Larenth and Den, and of course Den's really, pardon me, really stressed because of the whole situation. And we're told that in the brief looks he had in reflections and the dangerous looks over his shoulders, he had been completely impressed by Larenth, because she has been shooting the incoming blaster bolts and slug throwers, which is basically just bullets. And so the bolts that she was firing directly contacted the ones that were being aimed at them, and the bolts would be reflected back. And that's kind of what I said at the start of this review. I think this is officially makes Larenth one of the coolest Jedi. Because I think another thing is that she doesn't use a lightsaber. Because she's a Grey Paladin, she doesn't use a lightsaber. They use, blasters and vibro knives. And we see her use one a little bit later on in this chapter. But, they don't use lightsabers. So this adds a whole other sense of, epicness to Larenth. Um, and then thinking, well, if she can continue fighting like this, then they should be all right, and that she can maybe get shot into at one of the droids piloting the PCBUs. Um, and the is I think then there's something really funny that happens, and that's even Paul's reading just to laugh. And it's even funnier because this is on page two, because this is said on page 213. And we all know, the how 13's considered an unlucky number. And I'll just read it out to you. At first, he couldn't believe it. Now, after a few minutes, he was starting to feel like they might have a chance. Incredible as it was, she wasn't letting a slug, beam, or blast come anywhere near them. Then realised that if she was that phenomenally good, she would eventually get a couple good clear shots at the PCBUs themselves, and then they'd be out of trouble. "We're in trouble!" she shouted over her shoulder. Yeah, that made me laugh. And Naranth explains that she's running low of that the gas in a blaster in the gas in her chambers for her twin blasters is starting to run out. And then just says to note to himself to never be hopeful in a life or death situation again. And so then has an idea and says, and just says, "Hang on," and Larenth asks her where they're going, and "Hang on," he shouted, and leaned to the right, forcing the Weaver into a sharp turn. "Where are we going?" "Just keep shooting," he yelled. "I've got enough juice for another 30 seconds. Perfect, he thought, because in another 10 we'll either be free or dead. And they go through what looks to be a new building being constructed. It's not really made clear. Maybe it's an abandoned building. But they go through the first floor of a building, and it's got all a bunch of items in there. And Larenth gasps, and then thinks, "Oh, if this surprises a Jedi, then and they're just completely screwed." Um, Eventually, though, he's miraculously able to avoid a bunch of different things, and we're told that this is as deadly as going through an asteroid field. In Star Wars, going through an asteroid field is incredibly dangerous. So I think in real life there have been studies surrounding just how safe it would be to go through an asteroid field. Um, the studies just show that it's not really that dangerous. So I always think of that whenever I see the asteroid field dangers brought up in Star Wars, and they're not really, realistically, apparently, they're not meant to be very dangerous to fly through. But in Star Wars, they are dangerous. Anyway, then he's miraculously able to keep dodging and weaving, and eventually one of the PCBUs gets hit and hits a column or something and blows up. And once they're out the building, they slow down, and we're told it's because otherwise Stem feels like he'll explode if he does stop. Um, and Larenth compliments his gliding, and then asks, "Well, where's the second PCBU?" Um, I'll just read this bit out. Um, He slowed but didn't stop. If he had, he would have exploded from adrenal overload. That's how it felt, at least. He headed down the street. "That was pretty incredible piloting," she told him. "Just in time, too. The gas chambers are dry." Dane stopped the Weaver and turned to stare at her. "You mean we're unarmed? Great, what do we do with the other PCBU?" The second PCBU dropped down out of the night, directly behind them. "Shows up," Den finished weakly. And that's when Narenth reaches behind a damaged Leku. The one she has 10 centimeters blasted off of. and she pulls out a vibro knife and she throws it with such speed that Zen can't even see its movement, and it goes straight through the PCBU's equator where all the weapons are, and it starts sparking and stuff, and it starts to tilt, and Mammoth tells Den to go, 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 go. So Den sets off, and they're about 100 meters away when the PCBU collides with something and explodes, and Den hears the all too familiar sound from the Clone Wars of blown up metal being flung across, and Labyrinth just ends the chapter saying that I'm never unarmed, and that's where we end the chapter. Again, Jackson I5. It's good to kind of see how Jax is starting to have a little bit more faith in I5. You know, he's still not massively he still isn't massively trusting him. You know, it took I5 explaining his plan, and even when he did, Jackson was a little bit hesitant to it at first when he did explain the plan. And it was only and eventually it was just like when they had no other choice, Jack's kind of just went ahead with it because they just needed to get the PCBUs off them. So yeah, you can kind of see. So it's interesting to see, you know, how Jax is slightly warming up, even if it's just because he has to survive. Sorry, I had to pause the recording quickly. I had to sneeze, and I just decided to put the book up there as well. Anyway, it's again interesting, you know, that Jax has started to somewhat warm up to I5, but he's still very much against him. It's only it's like only the slightest bit he started warming up. And they're bickering as well. Not as good as Dane and I5, but you know, it's like, because it's I5 and he very much stands on his own opinion and his own capabilities. The way he just pretty much puts down Jax to say, like, I can do this. You do. I'm better. Is basically what he's saying, and I think that's pretty much what Jax is hearing him say. And of course, because Jax is a Jedi, he doesn't really believe him, because, you know, Jedi can enhance themselves to such great extents. But yeah. Then with Den and Labyrinth, you know, Den is again, Den's just Den. Den's just Den. He's great, but Labyrinth again. It was really just when we were told that when it was said that she was deflecting the blaster bolts back at the PCBUs by shooting the blaster bolts. So that was a bit of a because I don't know if that's ever been seen before in Star Wars. It may have been, but I don't know. I don't know if it has. It definitely hasn't appeared very frequently. You know, that's definitely not something you I think is in a lot of stuff. It wouldn't surprise me if then of course Night books are the only instance where we have that. But yeah, it was a really moment, because again, it's just very unique. The Grey Paladins themselves in general are just quite unique sets of Jedi because they don't use the lightsabers. And so you see now, you know, using, you know, more traditional bounty hunter smuggler weapons such as vibro knives and blasters. And we do see, you know, the Grey Paladins philosophy coming through in this chapter of, you know, only using the Force when it's absolutely necessary. When I forgot to bring it up, but when the second PCBU explodes and all the shrapnel and stuff's coming toward them, it's Labyrinth uses the Force to stop the few bits that would have hit them, that almost would have hit them, to stop them from coming any closer and bounce them back. Again, and it kind of shows us how the Grey Paladins generally only use the Force weren't absolutely necessary in that case. That could have given them some severe burns. So that's, was a necessary case, or might have even killed them, depending on everything. I'm fairly sure it definitely wasn't described as shrapnel. From what it sounded like, it was very big pieces, so it either would have given them severe burns or, would have outright killed them, so yeah. Um, Den just being completely, Den was just funny to read. I5 and Jax, though. Again, I'm still not quite sure how to read. I'm not quite sure how to describe them in this chapter. I know I did talk about them just, but still, it's really difficult to describe them. Because Jax still is not keen on I5 at all. He's still not keen on him at all. Again, it's not because he doesn't like droids, it's just that he just doesn't really care about droids. Like, he has nothing against them, he just doesn't really care. Again, to him, they're just machines. And so then you have I5, who's almost sentient, or he's sentient, and he's challenging Jax, a Jedi, and claiming that he's better than a Jedi. Uh, it's about claiming that he is better at doing these tasks, and to Jax, what he's doing is he's better than a Jedi, basically. And then when it's there really isn't much of a choice, just because they just need to get the PCBUs off their tail. It's not like they didn't have any other choices, but it's just they need to get it off their tail, and they had a plan there. So Jax just had to go for it because it was so in an urgent situation, So he went with I5's plan, and it works for one of them. Didn't quite work for the other one, but yeah, it was all really. You can kind of see some sort of partnership between them, kind of starting to brew. You know, I take it will only be at like towards the end of the third book that they actually start getting along. Because this is definitely going to be a slow burn. But but yeah, it's gonna be really but yeah, it's gonna be really interesting just to see how they are together and how Larenth and Zen are gonna get back to Jackson I5, or how Jackson I5 will get back to pleasantly Larenth and Zen, because they split up. So yeah, again, it was just, this is a really good action-packed chapter, which oh, so it's it's good for this book because again, this book can be a bit slow at times. It can be a bit slow and and it definitely affects the pacing at times as well. Like with the early chapters, and I think that's, even though we can't move away from the slow pacing, it still is a shadow that looms over the book, I think, at the moment. Funny, I think the third book's called Street of Shadows, or maybe it's the second one. But yeah, um, but it's the slow pacing persisted for so long at the start of the book that it kind of just shadows the rest of the book. So whenever we have a good pace chapter like this, it feels just so refreshing. Even though we have had good pace chapters for quite a while now. Um, so yeah, but again, it's just nice to have a bit of action, and I guess get some of the. This chapter was really just kind of like a highlight of some of the best parts of the book, which is, the bickering between that I5 and Zen have with others, or with each other. Well, they're not with each other because they're not in together, because we don't see them together in this chapter, which I think might be the first time in this chapter, in the book, I mean, where they're not seen together. They're in the same chapter, but we don't see them together. And I think that's the first time in this book that that's happened. But aside from I mean, the one chapter in the book so far where they've not been together at all. But anyway, um, they're just great characters. Jax, another fight again with Jackson. I'm trying to find something to say on them. Again, just I5's bickering with Jax, and how Jax really just isn't keen with I5, and he's just considering just chucking him out and trying to get out of the situation himself. Is it really just kind of shows how ignorant Jax is of droids, and how he just kind of dismisses them. Um, and he's somewhat aggressive to I5 as well in this chapter. Um, as well. So, which he has been aggressive to I5 throughout the rest of the book as well since they met, but still, he's been aggressive to I5. And it, again, kind of starts keeping feeling like it's an almost reaching an extreme as well. So, yeah. Anyway, I think that brings an end to this review. So, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.